Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Currin, and I'm the Employee and Community Impact Program Leader for Okta for Good. I'd like to welcome you to today's session. We're going to be talking about leveraging hidden talent to build your teams. I know it's an understatement to even say that there's a lot of craziness and it's a busy time right now, so thank you everyone so much for joining. For those who are not familiar, Okta for Good is the social impact arm of Okta, and our mission is really an extension of Okta. We like to connect people, technology, and community. And one of the areas that we really focus and are passionate about is workforce development. This idea of providing exposure to technology for people who are under-resourced or underrepresented. So before we dive into our panelists today, we have an incredible group of speakers who have a range of expertise in this area. Each has sort of a different perspective in this ecosystem. But first, I want to set the stage on why we're talking about workforce development today and this idea of the importance of building diverse teams. A couple of facts about the status quo. We know that during the pandemic, the unemployment rate for youth ages 16 to 25 has more than doubled. And we know that many companies are pulling back this opportunity to give workforce experience to these individuals because it is such a turbulent time. We also know that at the same time, companies always talk about how important it is and how beneficial it is to build diverse and more equitable teams. Not only is it more enjoyable for anybody on this team, but we also know that it leads to much better work. So I'm really, really excited for the panel that's with us today. I'd love for each of our panelists to go ahead and take just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and your experience with this work. And let's go ahead and start with Jeff Artis. Jeff, I'll pass it to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Artis. I'm the president and CEO of Genesys Works. Genesys Works is an organization focused on working with high school age youth as they're about to enter college and helping them get meaningful work-based experiences and prepare themselves for college or credentials that lead to a meaningful career. I would just say, to follow up on Anna's point, if you think about the statement, give me a lever and a place to stand, and I can change the world, is what we all aspire towards. But for many of the individuals I work with, the levers have been broken, the fulcrums have been moved to a point where leverage is almost impossible. And our goal is to replace those levers and move the fulcrum back to a more balanced point.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Kokoska. I lead our demand gen team at Okta for North America. And I am super excited to be here with you all today and talk more about leveraging hidden talent. It is one of my passions and the biggest joys of my job, hiring. So my team is an entry role for many teams at the company. And because of that, we're always on the pulse of hiring the best and most diverse talent and really setting the stage for that across the organization. And part of this hiring that we do includes several thriving internship programs. And I'm super excited to share more with you today.
All right, great. Thank you. It's really great to be here. Paul Chapman, yeah, I've lived in Silicon Valley now for close to 30 years and, predominantly in high-tech roles, high-tech leadership roles in high-tech companies. I've been fortunate and blessed to have worked for some incredible companies and with some incredible people. I've worked at Sun Microsystems, HP, VMware, Box, and now I'm at Cisco. And for a number of years, I've been involved in working with a number of organizations like Genesys Works, helping to provide career pathways and opportunities to professional careers for underserved youth and young adults. And I recently, I want to say recently, it's really getting close to 2 years now, I became a board member for Genesys Works. So it was great to be here with Jeff today, who's our president and CEO.
Great. Thank you to all of our panelists for introducing yourself. So excited about today's conversation. I think I'd like to go ahead and just start off with the current moment that all of us are in. We're about a year into this pandemic that has afflicted the entire globe. And I think it's, again, an understatement to say that this has really shaken up the concept of work. I think a lot of companies are responding to this and thinking a lot about how best to service our customers and our employees and our partners and every other part of work. My question is starting off for Jeff. When you talk to companies and different partners, they might have a lot of apprehension, I'm expecting, on hiring remote interns and hiring interns that are younger and maybe less experienced. I'd love to hear from you. What are the common misconceptions that you hear from your partners, and what is your response to that?
That's a great question. It's interesting. What we're seeing is the actually for our population, this has been a benefit. Many of our population are Gen Z, and working remotely or digitally or virtually, however you want to phrase it, is more natural to them. It's also removed some of the typical barriers we've had with internships program. Transportation is not a challenge anymore when you can work virtually. So we see that they have a more natural, and many times we find that they are more natural at working remote than other workers. It also removes that initial inhibition of going into the corporate world for the first time. The working from the comfort of their home, so that natural anxiety about going into that big glass building for the first time, meeting people. Everybody's on more on a level playing field. Everyone's working from their living room, so it just makes that a more comfortable entry point for those individuals, and they're not having to break through clicks that might naturally occur in corporations that are unintentional, but are barriers sometimes for these students getting engaged early on.
Great. Thank you so much for that perspective, Jeff. I'd love to hear your perspective, Paul. I know that you've clearly been a big leader and champion for this work, both at Box and now at Cisco. What is your perspective here?
Yeah, I mean, our interns prepared to work remotely. I'll echo what Jeff said. I actually am more concerned about people that have been in the workforce for 10, 15, 20 years and were they prepared to work remotely? Habits being what they are and so on. To Jeff's point, we find that, the youth of today, the Gen Z of today, even the millennials to a degree here, have grown up in a digital way. They're used to working. Call it in a what more work is more of a state of mind versus a place. And certainly something we pushed on at Box was that work was not a location; it was a state of mind. And I think that we're a year in now, and I'd say we've successfully transitioned in the most part. I would say that, of course, to Jeff's point, we may have mitigated some of those anxieties around going into the corporate space for the first time. We do miss some of those high fidelity interactions and building those social networks that I think are also very important. But also, and I think that we're at a point where things aren't going to go back to the way they were previously anyway. We are going to have this future hybrid working environment where some people will be going into the office permanently or on an ongoing basis, and some infrequently, and so on. And I think it's about how do we prepare ourselves for what the new future of work looks like. And I think that a lot of our students are very adaptable. I think we've all had to adjust our onboarding practices and hiring practices and how we bring new people into the workplace. But I wouldn't say that the question comes up at this point, like it did very early on, how our students are prepared to work in a remote environment. That was sort of like so yesterday now. So
Yeah, that's a really great point, and something that I think we've experienced a lot firsthand at Okta. Our workforce development programs have grown dramatically, and I see what you're saying, Paul, about how you really can't replace that in-person element of being able to shake somebody's hand and see them in person. But I do find that a lot of these interns and young people are so adept at changing their style of work, based on any type of circumstance. And that leads me into my question for Liz. I mean, Liz, you've had so much firsthand experience in leading these programs at Okta. She gave a very humble intro, but to give some background, Okta has recently increased our programs with interns from having about 3 interns every session to now 20. And Liz is really championing these efforts throughout her team. So Liz, I'm curious to hear from you. What has been, surprising to you in hosting Genesys Works interns and interns from other workforce development programs these past couple years?
Yeah, I know there was trepidation at first, especially for the high school interns, like how are we going to assimilate them, and also just into the culture and being aware of the activities we're doing after work or even during the day, and making sure they're high school appropriate, and then also can they do the tasks that we're going to be asking them to do, and quickly realized that they were going to give us a run for our money. So super inspired. It's so inspiring how dynamic and passionate and sharp every single one of these interns has been that's come through, both in Genesys Works in Europe And not only has that part just been inspiring, but it's also given some of our young managers an opportunity to be first-time managers and learn on their end what it's like to have a direct report and be able to support someone at the start of their
Yeah, that's
career.
really amazing. As a past Genesys Works manager, it was definitely an incredible learning experience. I'm sure, Jeff, you probably have a lot to add here. I know that within Okta, we have interns across many different departments. We've grown, Liz manages our demand generation and marketing. So we've had a high concentration of interns there, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about just what exactly these interns and young people can do across companies. What areas are you actively training them in? And where do you think this will go in terms of areas that they can work?
That's a great question. So, we train them. I think the most important thing we train them in is on professional skills and building their self confidence and ability to do things. I find when I talk to a lot of our customers, the actual training we do on a specific discipline is interesting. What's more important is giving that young person the confidence to go explore and do other things. We've got students providing a variety of roles, many in IT space, but also in other roles that are supporting roles. They could be doing a level of project coordination. They might be doing a very low level of business analysis. And so what's really important though is that they have a thirst for doing something different. These environments, these work-based environments, give an opportunity to stretch their horizons. It also, we find if you just put them in an environment where you have process-based work and sort of give them the basic instructions, they're well prepared to take on those challenges. Now don't get me wrong, they're going to have challenges no different than any other entry level employee you have, whether they come from high school or college or even older. But what we find different is they're not afraid to try new things. In fact, they're thirsting to try new things. They want to learn more. They want to engage more. And so we're looking to expand to find opportunities for them to do things beyond the realm of IT and look for roles where what's more important is a person's attitude, determination, willingness to learn, and their ability to take on tasks where you don't have to have a specific discipline skill, but you have to have the willingness to want to learn and willingness to try new things and be able to do a level of free thinking. And we think that's going to be more important as a skill set for them to build as they look to go to college and beyond.
Great. And I know, Paul, you have a lot of experience in this area of bringing interns onto teams that might have never had them before. And I think that many people understand the value, as Jeff says, is reaching out and giving this opportunity to interns and to new communities. But I'd love to kind of switch gears and talk about the benefits to the company. I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, as Liz said, how important and beneficial this is for, let's say, a first-time manager bringing on talent from Genesys Works or other workforce dev organizations. What other opportunities can you talk about for teams and for companies?
Yeah, well, actually, I think that this is, like any sort of program. I've been doing this for a number of years now, and I sort of call it I'm on second generation of students now, or second generation of interns, and it's great to see sort of the first generation now coaching and mentoring the second generation. You've got to start somewhere, but to Liz's point, coaching, mentorship, opportunities to be supervisors, first-time managers, and bringing in sort of call it entry level talent into the organization creates movement. It creates movement for people that are in those positions, gives them opportunities to grow in the existing team. And I always say to people, what is the risk? What is the risk of not doing this, right? Really, truly, what is the risk? I think you have what you would call maybe some resistance coming from hidden norms or something. But to me, it's sort of like if you think about normal hiring practices, the probability of hitting a bullseye every single hire is actually probably a lower probability than what it is to bring on the talent that we're seeing come through. I always think about this as talent is global, it's the opportunity is not. And there really is no risk to our organizations or to there's only beneficial outcome to bringing people on through these pathways, giving opportunity. It's not a given. The opportunity is provided, and then it's earned from there on. And we've had some of our best talent come through these programs that have started to grow their careers and now are mentoring and coaching that next generation of
Yeah,
interns as
Paul, I
well.
like this idea of thinking of kind of the evolution of this work long term. You know, you start maybe hiring a couple of interns, but then what comes from that in the next class and how one group can kind of teach and mentor the next. Jeff and Liz, I'm curious to know if you have thoughts on that. I know, Liz, we've had a couple of teams now. Now we have groups of interns who now collaborate and work together. And Jeff, I'm sure you have this perspective of what happens once these interns come into these companies and kind of where can that go. I'd love to hear from each of you your thoughts on that, maybe starting with Liz.
Yeah, we have some interns that were with us last year that are coming back this summer likely, and we're looking for roles, and we hope sometime that they will all have positions at Okta. And truly, it's this isn't just about giving back. It's super refreshing to have new people with fresh eyes on the team, and then also be building this talent pool for future, like building the Okta family in advance. And um, I'm super excited to see. We've only been doing this for 3 years now, so we haven't quite reached that point yet of hiring full time some of these interns, but I see it in the future, definitely.
Yeah, Liz, I think Liz touched on a couple of key points. When I think of it, there's really two things that are going on here. One is access, access for these individuals to organizations like Okta to see it. And second is exposure. And exposure is both to the student and the company. As companies look to fill out their pipeline to talent, this exposes them to an alternative set of talent that they may typically have not have looked at. And it gives them a view of what these individuals can do. And as in our particular case, as the intern continues their journey for the next 4 or 5 years that either pursue college or credentials, whatever, there are increasing opportunities for the customer to engage them in other ways, right? They can engage them as summer interns while they're in college. We find a lot of our students may choose to take a gap year, as often students do, or to delay college, and there are full-time hiring opportunities because they might have gotten some skills. We find many times our customers sometimes are dismayed, like, well, I like this young man and young woman, and can I hire them now? And sometimes that's a great opportunity for the student to step back and think about it. Go, well, yeah, because now if I go work for Okta now, I could get something like tuition reimbursement, which actually lowers my burden on going to college, right? So I think this is a way for the access to the individuals to see what's possible and exposure for both parties to experience each other and decide what are the best options for them to continue their engagement and progression as they look to both meet their goals.
Jeff, that's a really good point and something I should have mentioned also. But because of our involvement with Genesys Works and Europe, we realize we have a restrictive path into the company. We required a college degree. And so we've now changed that for particular roles to give a path in for those that don't have the plan to go to college or means to go to college. So we've just created in my organization a team where we can have applicants from a variety of different backgrounds, and I'm very, very excited about that. Where it's one of the things I'm probably most excited about this year launching.
Yeah,
And
and maybe if I can add on that as well, is something certainly I've worked on in the past is helping to rewrite hiring philosophies. We talk about diversity and inclusion and being inclusive, and yet we have hiring philosophies that are exclusive. We must have 4 year degree, must have gone to certain schools, and we're finding that is actually an exclusive philosophy. And as we have we rewritten, remember, we're not asking somebody to come in and be the GM and run a P&L for a large part of our organization, right? And so it's making these adjustments is, and I think the other thing that without over rotating on student or interns, you mentioned Year Up, young adults that are actually, and we've worked with Year Up as well, and we've moved people from finishing up their Year Up work with us, and then moving into maybe being contract before moving to employee. And there's a path that we now have about onboarding people through these programs. And we have not only found, as I mentioned before, access to great talent, which we all want, right? We're starved of talent, but also diversity. As we've widened the funnel, the diversity, our I don't know if you call it pool of diversity, has got wider as well. So again, another set of very positive outcomes when you rethink something that may have been sort of the traditional way of doing things you've had in your hiring practices for many, many years?
Yeah, the pathways comment is key because I think there has been a mindset that the pathway to a good job is college for everybody. But we all know that's not true, right? There are multiple ways for people to get pathways. A degree is one, credentials are another. Experience work from other companies is one. At the same time, the pathway for the individual is often not linear, right? Again, some may choose to go straight to college, some may choose to take a gap year, some may choose to defer college, some may choose never to complete college, right? So I think these types of programs give both organizations an opportunity to explore multiple pathways. To Paul's point, as people are trying to hire different people in different ways, the traditional single path view of the world doesn't give everybody equal opportunity. And quite frankly, it stilts both parties' ability to meet their goals. And so I think the changing idea of saying, let me explore multiple pathways to explore getting talent. And for the individual themselves, let me explore multiple ways to get to a meaningful career, right? And it isn't necessarily linear. There are multiple ways to get there.
Yeah, Jeff, I remember the last conversation that we had. You said you referenced this really interesting study. I believe it was called "Dismissed by Degrees." I think it was a
Yes.
Harvard study. I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit. It sort of taps into this idea that we want to be inclusive and not exclusive in the candidates that we're considering, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also how to widen our lens to find the best candidates. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there is a Harvard Business Review study called Dismissed by Degrees, and it really talks about not only should we not be looking for everyone to come in from a college degree, but also in business terms, talk about the financial cost of doing that. As I talked about earlier, a lot of times when we think about entry level roles, for many of us and those of you in the audience, the thing you went to college and got a degree for is not necessarily what you're doing today, right? And what got you the job, what's doing it is your judgment, your grit, your determination, your ability to work hard. And so for a lot of entry level jobs, that's the primary criteria. By focusing on a college degree, you're often overpaying for that, right? You're focusing to resubsidize the cost of the individual going to college when you have to do it. And the study lays out the financial implications to you as an organization of requiring everyone to have a college degree in roles that don't necessarily require that level of education or that level of extra burden of cost that those individuals have taken on, that they pass on to you in the forms of you having to pay a higher salary.
Great. Um, so now I want to think a little bit about, after you sort of widen this aperture and you're finding the best candidates and, building more diverse teams. I think we know that that's not the finish line. We want to make sure that we get these great folks into the company, but that they're actually thriving and want to stay and producing better work and aren't just, grabbing coffee and kind of grabbing their seat each day, logging onto Zoom each day. So I'd like to think about your perspective on how we ensure that these people are successful and how they're building relationships and really doing their best work at these respective companies. Liz, like I said, you've had a ton of experience building teams and working with managers. What have you found has worked really well in terms of creating a successful onboarding?
Yeah, we are lucky to have a really tenured powerhouse team managing our intern program at Okta. And I haven't personally onboarded an intern in quite a while, but my gut check was like it's probably pretty similar to just being a good manager. I checked in with some of my frontline managers to the interns just to get their feedback, and it's true. It is like all the tools that you would use as a present helpful manager are the same. And so really checking in often. It's also in this case, it's easy to forget they're in school at times, especially during these virtual months that we've been in. And also it's easy to forget that they haven't experienced a corporate, or a virtual environment. So making sure that you have check-in calls and that you're ensuring they really understand everything that they have on their plate and that they have the support they need to do their best work.
Great. And Paul, do you have anything to add there in your experience bringing on?
Yeah, I touched on it a little moment ago. These are great opportunities for, we've all had to rethink our onboarding in the last year anyway. But when you think about mentoring opportunities, coaching opportunities, to me, you have to, there's classes of different workers or different types of roles when they join an organization. We have executive onboarding programs, which are different than, manager onboarding programs, which are different than individual contributor programs, different from engineering programs or what have you. And so I think it's just another form of a type of worker that's joining the organization. You have to have a program around it. We're bringing on students, we're bringing on young adults, we're bringing on someone who's, even if you weren't leveraging the these great programs like Genesys works, you would still be needing to focus in on how do you best onboard a new employee for a particular role, whether it's entry level or a senior position. So to me, we don't really distinguish. But we do make sure that it has its own special sort of focus around mentoring and coaching and onboarding. And to Liz's point, more check-ins, because being self-sufficient to some degree remote is different if you haven't been in the workforce before.
One other thing those are great points, Paul. And one other thing that just came forward for me as you were talking is helping them have access to others in the virtual world, especially. So making sure they're getting access to build those relationships. Because one thing about an internship is starting to network and get to know the people that are going to be your helpers through your career and the people that are going to be your mentors. A couple of things we've been doing at Okta is monthly, my boss and myself and several other leaders have monthly one-on-ones where we have fun names for them. Like mine is Kick It with Kokoska, and my boss's is Lean In with Len. But we give access to whoever wants to come and sit with us, because we don't get to have those hallway conversations or just swing by desks right now that are more organic. And it does feel a little forced, but just being able to have a meeting just to say hi, have a cup of coffee, get to know someone, build a relationship is important. So finding those ways and then taking feedback from them as well of what they'd like to see. My first one-on-ones with some of our recent Genesys Works interns, one of them said, I like to be checked in with often, which right now is just making me remember I need to check in with her. But, just how are you doing? What is happening? How is the internship going? And getting feedback so we can continue to improve our program as well.
The onboarding point is important because I think, as Paul mentioned, different skill groups, engineering, you would onboard that person different than someone in the finance department. And I think companies should think about it this way. You're now reaching out to a different talent pool. And no different than if you're doing a different department, you need to rethink your onboarding process for that talent pool and your assimilation process for that talent pool, right? You can't just assume they're going to come and say, well, listen, I think most companies have a summer intern for college programs. They have a specific way of managing that and treat it as a specific program. They don't just bring them in and say, oh, there's a desk, go figure it out. I think the same thing needs to happen for this population. Think about it, it's a new population. So not only is it going to be different to those individuals, it's going to be different to the people that manage those individuals, the people that work with those individuals. Something as simple as the school schedule, right? They're worried, they're not worried about childcare necessarily, but they're worried about their school schedule. They have homework. And so it doesn't mean they won't be able to do the work, but it is thinking differently about, as we have to do in this environment, all things, we've had to think about how we deal with working mothers who have children at home, right? We have to rethink the way business operates.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a great point. It goes back to Paul's point that I loved about, how you would onboard somebody is kind of similar to how you would onboard anybody else. You have to really listen to what their life and their personal, needs, and then adapt to that. Liz, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing, and that is, we touched on this just a little bit earlier. We're also dealing with a generation here now. Makes me sound old. We're dealing with a generation now that is actually born digital and has grown up leveraging the tools that we have for communication. Whether it's a very social, collaborative, way of growing up using social tools, and it doesn't have to be a video check-in. It could be a Slack message or a Teams message or whatever it might be. And I think that actually what I'm finding, Jeff, is that our students or our interns and our young adults, they're not shy because they're very used to having these channels of communication anyway. And it's actually quite refreshing. It's not like someone who's shy and hiding behind a video screen or something. They're very, very comfortable with using the technology we have today. One, that we're using for remote anyway. So that's a good thing. And then two, not being afraid to actually, connect with people like Liz and have those and have that that dialogue. So that's been a
And
good
there's
thing.
the skill to building relationships different ways, right? And think about corporate America, right? We have typically built our relationships by I go to work every day and I sit in a cubicle next to someone else. Or I go to lunch with that person, and that's how I build my relationships, my network, whatever. That world is going to be very, very different, even when this ends, right? And been able to, there's a generation out there who's built networks with people that they've never met, right? On social media, on different kinds of platforms, and they have that skill set. In those ways, some stuff listed, they can help the rest of us learn how to do that. They can build relationships and networks and learn and trade information. They're comfortable doing that in a virtual remote environment. This is not unusual to them. This is actually more comfortable for them than the other world.
I'm interested to think about this concept of where this goes. I had a really interesting conversation with Paul a while ago where he brought up this idea that had this been some massive experiment that we started where a company decided, hey, I'm going to have all of my workers go remote and we're going to embrace remote work and just fully lean into that, it might have had completely different results and outcomes than this pandemic that we've sort of had to endure for the past year. And while we've had challenges with that, it's also exposed a lot of opportunities in this space. So, Paul, since I basically stole your story, I'd love to start with you. What are your thoughts on what is like? Is it a hybrid in the future of what comes from the pandemic versus pre-pandemic, or sort of where do you expect that things will go?
Well, very early on, we were having a lot of conversations around psychological safety, and this is only going to be short term. But I think as people realized this was longer term, we also started to realize there are significant benefits when working remote. The give back of time, the reduced stress on commutes, and the loss of time moving between buildings and conference rooms, and all the things that are, and offices generally are not a good place to go get work done. They actually are generally interrupt driven factories, right? We're constantly being interrupted. However, to Liz's earlier point, they also have their, I think we're going to continue to have office spaces for purposeful and purposeful interactions, more purposeful reasons for going to the office, not just to go there, sit at your desk and do some work and go home, or go in and have a bunch of meetings. I think we're going to have much more purposeful interactions in our office spaces. I also think we've learned some things that are better around more flexible schedules, personal schedules. Some people are better working early in the morning. Some people are night owls. Some people have certain personal commitments that they have to take care of in the middle of the day. Take the dog for the walk, go grocery shop, whatever it might be. And I think it's a lot less about having people come to the office to be productive, and having people have this flexibility in the way that they can work and choice. A lot of companies now are declaring, if you want to work from home permanently going forward, you can. And I think, Anna, we're going to see people that will want to come back into the office. I personally would love to come back into the office. Do I want to go back 5 days a week? Perhaps not. Maybe I'll go in 1 day a week. Maybe I'll go in twice a week. Maybe I'll mix it up. I think the freedom of flexibility, the give back of time, the ability to work from a home office and focus on things, I think is where you're going to start to see the hybrid. And I think generally, most people I talk to and most companies or organizations I talk to, I think are seeing a very similar trend in that regard as well.
In addition to all some of those things you said, this remote virtual world, or this hybrid world, gives opportunity to companies and individuals in places that maybe they couldn't think about before. I'm sure many of you in the audience are like Paul, I'm deciding whether to go back to work, and you see more and more companies saying that large portions of their workforce is going to be virtual forever, right? Which means talent doesn't have to be local, right? If you've got a virtual requirement, you can now recruit people to work in places that you're not, because you just need access to technology, right? This gives opportunity to individuals access to supply that you weren't able to get to before. That's really, really powerful, right? That we can do this that we weren't able to do before. Don't get me wrong, there are going to be many companies that still have some level of physical presence required, whether it's every day or 1 day a week, to some, But there are a lot of companies, a lot of roles where they'll be, listen, I just need you to be able to get access to get the work done and be virtual. And for those opportunities, you can now recruit anywhere.
Yeah. I'll add one other thing to that, Jeff, and whether it's organic or by policy allowing things to happen, we're seeing a very big shift in what I would call location composition of our organizations anyway. During the past year, many people have chosen to self relocate back to maybe where they grew up, where their parents are, where they have some friends and family, moving away from where maybe the hubs that companies have. And as companies have widened the funnel, to your point, Jeff, and reducing maybe some of the restrictions on location dependence for certain roles, they're finding access to talent faster, and diversity of talent is broader. And so there's those beneficial outcomes that are happening as well. And I think even when we sort of get back to what we call the post-COVID working era, we know we're going to have employees that have never worked pre-COVID, right, in the future, pre-COVID, post-COVID. We're going to find that more people are going to be have what we call our location, not location, uh, uh, the geographic disbursement of our employees is going to have organically changed in the last year anyway. So that's just something that I think organizations are going to be working through, even when we do open up our offices for
Yeah, this is
occupancy.
something we've definitely been embracing at Okta. I mean, Liz is very familiar with this. We lean in towards the idea of dynamic work. So not just remote work and not just in-office work, but working in the way and the style that really works best for you. And I think we've really experienced that with this last round of interns. I mean, Liz, yours are not only are the managers, but the interns are also dispersed all across the US. And I think we've thought mostly about kind of matching up time zones and making sure that work styles are similar. But do you have any kind of final thoughts on that question before we move on?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Jeff and Paul have said. And I'm personally super excited for dynamic work, and it's just been accelerated through this pandemic. One of my favorite things about dynamic work is large meetings. It used to be so challenging when we have 20 people in a boardroom and then about 20 people, across regions on a Zoom and trying to hear each other and not talk over each other. There's this level playing field that I think really serves our interns as well, because we all have the same amount of real estate on the screen, and maybe we talk over each other some on Zoom, but for the most part, it's a pretty respectful environment and you can also get your voice heard if you can't get a word in edgewise in the chat, which I love, and I use. But in terms of long term, it is great because we can reach different populations now and have even more diversity across our team, which is going to make us even stronger.
Yeah, I think there's some studies that have shown, and certainly this was early on. I don't know if it's still holding true today, but when everybody's on sort of the equal playing field of not half in a conference room and half not, the engagement or participation and the engagement of attendees has actually significantly increased. So I think that's something else that we will look to find that blend as we move back to an office, the ability to go back into an office, taking the best of what we've learned during this year or so, versus the downside of what we miss. If you think about our office space, it has our company's identity to it. It has where you sort of go to get your dose of culture and your identity of who you are as an organization, and those social and participative high fidelity interactions are something that we miss, but we got to find that balance between those two. None of us know yet because we haven't been in the post-COVID sort of
Exactly.
era
Yeah, it's
yet.
been a very fun, sometimes less fun experiment that I'm excited to see the results of. So we're coming up on the end of our session. So I think that the last question that I want to ask is really getting to the heart of why we're hosting this session on finding this hidden talent for your teams and in working with workforce development partners. On today's session, we probably have many leaders from IT organizations, from all types of different companies from across the world. I'd love to hear from each of you on what advice or what thoughts do you have for somebody who's maybe interested in working with Genesys Works or Year Up or a different workforce development org in their geography, but maybe has apprehension and is a little bit wary to try this out for the first time? What words of advice would you have? Let's start with Jeff.
I'd go back to Paul's earlier comment. What do you have to lose? Right? There's no reason why you couldn't try this, right? The financial implication is not significant for companies of your size. The risk is relatively modest and low. And if you think back, we were all new employees at some time, somewhere at one place, right? And it may have happened at a different stage of life, but we all, for the most part, learned on the job, right? And so I would ask you to give these individuals an opportunity to learn on the job. Give them a try. Give them the same opportunity that you were given at some point in your past to prove yourself out in the organization. It's a relatively low risk, and the return is significant.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Paul or Liz?
I can paint a story for this one. So I think it was our first year with Genesys Works interns. We had 3 at the time, and we had them talk about their year. So each gave a presentation on what they learned. They were in our large all hands space, and it wasn't a huge crowd, but it's a big room, and they were had to be on stage and share in a vulnerable way what they learned and where they were headed and all of that. And so those of us in the audience were just blown away. And there was at one point this woman stood up and said, she couldn't contain herself. And she said, "I cannot believe it. I did not know you were in high school." And there was not a dry eye in the house at the end of that. And that if that's not enough to decide to do this, my hope and wish is that this becomes the norm. We all have programs like this in corporate America and beyond. And this is just a non-negotiable part of the teams that we build.
Yeah, so to me, it's always been, to Jeff's point, none of us have ever gotten to where we are today without somebody providing us opportunity along the way. Through no fault of our own, we've won life's lottery, and or through no sort of we were born into an opportunity that others aren't. And what we're saying is talent is global, but the opportunity is not. How can we use our resources and our networks to be able to provide professional career pathways for people who, through no fault of their own, may not be afforded those opportunities? And to Jeff's earlier point and mine, what is the downside? There's only upside. There is no downside. What is the risk? There is no risk. It's only upside. And what we're finding is that the mutually beneficial outcomes that we get, both for our organizations, this is not a give me. This is earned. We provide the opportunity, and then it's earned from there. And speaking from experience, these programs only have multiple benefits and no downside. Start out with a sponsorship. Start out with helping people write with resume writing. Help them with interview skills. Help them with tours of your facility on what it's like to be inside a corporate environment. Bring them in for a day. Bring them in for a week. Bring them in as an intern. There's many different ways you can help. One of the things I find a lot of the time is a lot of companies have these community programs. Give back to the community, and they spend half a day doing things or a day doing something, and it's one and done. No, they're great activities, but it's one and done. Here's an opportunity to do something that is really paying it forward. In some cases, you're bringing income into the family, into the community, and you're really paying it forward for the next generation as well. So to me, there's how can you help? There's a lot of different ways to help, and there's no reason why not to.
There's no risk in trying this for the first time. Thank you so much. I loved your final responses. I think it just really hit to the heart of why this work is important. It's been such a privilege just for me personally, and getting to work with employees who get to interact with and continually be impressed by these amazing individuals. So I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you so much not only for joining for this really great conversation today, but really, making this work possible and paving the way for these opportunities to be built. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much. And for everybody in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to continue asking in the chat. And if you are interested in these programs or want to learn more, feel free to reach out to me or to organizations like Genesys Works or Year Up. We're more than happy to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much.